We've picked out 5 guys to watch at the Combine this week, and we found something a little crazy maybe that's been said about them, and I'm going to ask you buy or sell. So how about Anthony Richardson is the first quarterback off the board? Bud, buy or sell?
I'm going to sell, but in like a positive manner. I love this guy from a physical traits standpoint. AR is just so talented. If you guys have seen this dude in person, which I have since he was a junior in high school here in the state of Florida, the arm is immediately going to be one of the best arms in the NFL. Athletically, he's pretty freaky. Now, is he polished? No. I mean, two separate staffs have had little trouble getting the most production out of him. But I really think he's a pretty special talent. And if he can sit somewhere for a year, learn the position, and develop, I think there really might be something there. So I'm not going to buy him going first overall or even the first quarterback taken. But I also kind of think he might have been playing hurt this year, too. If you watch, he was lights out against Utah. And in the second play of that Kentucky game, which was the very next big game they played, all of a sudden he takes this shot to the knee. I'm not a doctor, but that doesn't look great. I've seen the coach's tape on this. He gets up. He's got a decent little limp around there. It wouldn't surprise me if he's actually much better when he's fully healthy. So the guy, pretty gutsy, played through it. Tools-wise, I'm pretty impressed.
I'm going to sell this here. Anthony Richardson is a guy that's got all the tools, big arm talent, can run around, very athletic, but he has not shown at the college level in the SEC that he was consistently able to make throws from the pocket, which is what you have to do to be competitive in the National Football League. And if you look at how much trouble Lamar Jackson is having right now getting a new contract with the Baltimore Ravens, it makes you think, are teams built to build an offense around a guy who's going to need a lot of design runs because he struggles a little bit at times completing passes from the pocket? Those are things that make me think he's going to get drafted high, but he won't be the first overall quarterback taken.
Yeah, I'm going to sell on this too, guys. Just based on what we've seen in drafts in past years, it's really hard to pick that high on a guy with that much upside, but also that much risk. So I'm selling as well. 3 sells. All right, our next question here. Will Levis be this year's biggest first-round bust? Carl, buy or sell?
Woo. I'm gonna buy this. I'm gonna buy this. A lot of big time hype around Will Levis, but I don't see him in the same category as C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young. I don't think he's better than Anthony Richardson either. And so, in terms of what people are expecting, I still haven't figured out why he's in the conversation with those guys in terms of being an elite quarterback. Hasn't produced in the same way. A lot of interceptions out of him as well. I don't see it. It looks like he's going to get drafted pretty high, but I'm gonna buy this.
People are making that Josh Allen type bet here, right? Allen, big time tools, not a great completion percentage in college, some struggles, but I do see it. So I'm going to go ahead and sell on this. I'm not sure he's going to be a hit, but I don't think he'll be the biggest bust of the draft. I thought Mark Stoops made a terrible hire at offensive coordinator when he lost Liam Cohen to the Rams. That offense completely fell apart. The offensive line was a disaster. The O-line coach went to Alabama, and I thought Levis carried that team this year when he was healthy. I'm not sure how many other people can even name a single Kentucky receiver because you remember they lost Wan'Dale Robinson off that 2021 team. And then Levis had the really bad ankle injury, missed the South Carolina game. You saw how inept they were on offense when he was out. That game tells me a lot about just how bad the talent around him was for Kentucky. I think this guy's got a lot of guts. I think he's got a lot of tools, and kind of like AR, I mean, he's going to have to ease into it, but I think he has the second best tools of all the quarterbacks in the draft physically.
Carl, why do you think Levis is such a polarizing prospect? You talked about all of the hype. You're not necessarily sure if he's going to be a bust or if he's going to be spectacular, but there are people on so many different sides of the aisle. I've seen him go in mock drafts as high as #1 overall, and then I've seen some where he drops to the second round. Why do you think he is such a polarizing prospect?
Because on paper, he has all the physical tools that you look for from the size, from the athleticism, from the big arm talent. He has everything that you're looking for, but his production has not always equaled what his intangibles appear to be. And so I think that's going to be people on 2 different sides of the lane. Do you go with the guy that has the physical skills, that looks like what you want your quarterback to look like? Or do you go with a guy like Bryce Young who plays like what you want your quarterback to play like? And I think that is the decision that has to be made by NFL personnel here.
No doubt about it. I will say, after the Sam Bradford contract, they changed the CBA. So you no longer nuke your salary cap forever if you miss on a quarterback. These quarterbacks now in the first round are cheap. They come out, they don't even make top 20 quarterback money in the NFL, especially if you're in that sort of like pick, 10 pass. So from that standpoint, it's worth it to take shots on guys who have big time tools, because if you have to cut them in 2 or 3 years, it doesn't kill your salary cap like it would with a Sam Bradford or guys back then when you were paying them top 5 quarterback money. That's really changed the calculus here when you draft quarterbacks.
100%. All right. Our next prompt here. Teams are making a mistake by overlooking Deuce Vaughn because of his size. Carl, buy or sell?
I'm going to buy that. Deuce Vaughn has been one of the most productive football players in the country the last couple of years. Key stat here. Since 2015, there are only 4 Power 5 running backs that average at least 100 yards rushing and 35 yards receiving per game. Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, and the 4th guy, Deuce Vaughn, who's been a super productive player. He's going to bring you value on 3rd down. He's got the ability to be involved in the passing game, can be an every down back. Even though he's smaller, he's been good in pass protection and can help you in the kick return game. There's a lot of value here in the National Football League for Deuce Vaughn, and he's a guy, despite his size, that has been explosive, that has made big-time plays, has showed he can run in between the tackles and catch the ball on the perimeter and down the field. He's a high-value pick for a lot of teams that run spread multiple offenses. He's going to have a career in the National Football League for a very long time.
All right, I'm going to sell this just because, look, the fact that we're even talking about him and the fact that he's going to get drafted at that height means he's not being overlooked, but he might be undervalued. I would agree with that. I think this guy has a seriously good skill set. He's kind of like a Darren Sproles, if we can throw back a couple years. He really is a well-rounded football player, like Carl says. And look, he's not going to be the first back off the board. That's going to be Robinson. Everywhere you look projects Gibbs to be the second. I think that's probably a lock. I don't know who the 3rd back off the board will be. Maybe it's Tyjae Spears of Tulane. Maybe it's this guy. It could happen.
Well, what Deuce Vaughn has shown you, Bud, is that you have to put him in that conversation because of the production of his team and his own production. We have to get past the point in football where we stop looking at so much of what we think guys can do and we look at what guys actually did. And so I think that when you look at the running back position, Deuce Vaughn is a guy that produced year after year, game after game. Some of these other guys are a lot of hype, but they always didn't come through when it mattered the most, and that's actually when you play football.
It's probably important to
I think if you look at the...
Oh, go ahead.
No, I think if you look at that list we had on screen, I mean, to me, it's a pretty clear 1-2. And then, right, well, he wasn't on it. I think he probably should have been, right? Like, I'm not taking him over Bijan, and I'm not taking him over Gibbs because the high-end upside of the athleticism, I think, is different. Everybody else, I think it's totally fair game to argue he's the 3rd back in the draft. Yeah,
I was just going to mention that we should probably say that he is 5'6". That is where he is listed. So when we talk about small, that is his height. 2-time All-American, though. I mean, broke a bunch of records. Clearly very productive, especially in the pass game, too. That's definitely something that you want to see out of a running back. Carl, we mentioned it, the list that we just showed up of what CBS Sports thinks in terms of the rankings of the running backs. Where do you think he should fall among this year's class of running backs?
I think he's got to be the 3rd back that you take, like Bud said, after Robinson and after Gibbs. I think that he's got that type of talent, that type of versatility, and most important, he produced when it was time to play football. I watched all of these guys play, and there were games that all of them weren't on top of their game. Deuce Vaughn is a guy that was very productive, and that's got to matter when you're talking about the game of football.
All right. Well, chances are if you're watching this program, you're probably a pretty diehard college football fan, so you recognize the first 3 names that we mentioned. Here's a guy, though, that you probably are hearing for the very first time, and that's Princeton wide receiver Andrei Iosivas. And he's very fast. He is also somebody that is a member of Princeton's track and field team. He is an All-American in track. He's broken records at the NCAA track level in the heptathlon, which, by the way, that is 7 different events that he runs and participates in. So my question here is, will he be the fastest player at the combine? Bud, buy or sell?
I'm going to buy. I mean, there's a lot of good candidates for this. I think we have some really good running backs this year as well who could do it. But look, the heptathlon, that includes the 60-meter dash. And he smoked that thing. And that actually translates pretty well to the 40 yards. If you're doing your NFL combine betting and you look for the fastest 40 guy, I'm not sure a lot of people are going to be throwing down some coin on the Princeton dude. But if you get some really big odds, look, 60-meter translates to 40 yards pretty well because it's a sprinter's game. This could happen.
I'm going to sell this. Great player here from the Ivy League. Really, really good speed. Maybe even great speed. But the fastest 40 at the combine, I don't know. Heptathlon, you are right. They do have a 60-meter. But that's not the same as running the open 60 against the fastest guys in the country. I think that he's going to be in the top 3 guys, maybe 5. But I don't think that he's going to be number 1.
I've got some more numbers for you guys. Just real quick, his 60 was 6.71 seconds, which translates to a 4.28. So that would be incredibly fast, Bud.
That would be really, really good. I think Tyler Scott from Cincinnati is the other guy I would look at. That dude can really go. There's a couple of them, though. The running backs, receivers this year are pretty quick.
Chris Johnson actually came out and said that he thinks that Tyler Scott will break the record of the fastest combine 40, which is 4.22 by John Ross. So we'll see if that ends up happening. But Carl, I have to ask you from a coaching perspective, we love to talk about the 40. Now we can bet on the 40. How important is it, though, as you begin to put the puzzle pieces together of a draft prospect?
You can't coach size and you can't coach speed. If you have guys that can really, really run like that, you have got opportunity to take them. You have to take them, especially if their film also shows up. Now, there's a lot of fast guys who drop footballs or who aren't as productive when they have the ball in their hand. But when you have guys that can really, really fly and they've shown you on tape that they can do things with the football, you have to take a guy that's that fast because he bails you out of a lot of situations. Quarterback gets in trouble, dumps it into the flat. All of a sudden, it's a 60-yard touchdown. We have a need for speed. It's something that you can't coach. It's something that you can never have too much of.
Carl nailed it. So if you are a draft person watching our show today, go pull up East Carolina, Cincinnati. East Carolina outplayed Cincinnati for probably like 60 of the 65 snaps in that game. But the 5 snaps they didn't, Tyler Scott punt return, Tyler Scott 80-yard bubble screen touchdown, Tyler Scott 75-yard bubble screen touchdown. Cincinnati couldn't do a damn thing on offense. They got the ball in that guy's hands a couple times. All of a sudden, ball game. Cincinnati wins. They play to go to the AAC title game, despite the fact East Carolina on a down-and-down basis was way better. Speed wins.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Cincinnati, how about his teammate Ivan Pace Jr.? Our question here is, Pace is too small to be a star in the NFL. A 5'10", 230-pound linebacker. Carl, buy or sell?
I'm going to sell that. Ivan Pace is a guy I've been watching for a long time, since he was playing at Miami of Ohio, before he made the transfer to the University of Cincinnati. He is a football player. And every football coach, every football player personnel guy, they have certain measurables that they look for. But every once in a while, there's a guy that produces at a high level that may be an inch too short, a pound too light. Ivan Pace is that guy. He is a football player. He's going to play in the National Football League for a really long time.
Totally agree with Carl here. They doubted him at every turn. Look, he signed with Miami, Ohio out of high school, dominated there, then transferred over to Cincinnati, dominates there. I don't know if he's going to dominate in the NFL, but he's definitely not too small to be a top draft pick. Like the guy, he hustles, he has good technique, he can bend, he has good functional strength. I have a hard time seeing this guy not stick on a roster for a long time at the very least. Like what coach wouldn't want to have him, if not starting as one of your top reserves?
Yeah.
And also brings a ton of special teams value when you talk about all the different phases of the kicking and the kick coverage game. And you can never have too many linebackers on your roster for those roles, as they're very important as well, with only having 53 guys on the roster.
I mean, in general, we are seeing linebackers get smaller and faster as they're being asked to step into a little bit more pass coverage. So, Carl, how have you seen linebackers really develop throughout your time, watching and loving the game of football?
It went from being guys that were more hole pluggers for the run game, and
Yeah.
you have to be able to play in space now. You have to be able to drop from your inside position off to the number three receiver to cover underneath routes. You might have to line up in the slot. You have to be able to play against all kind of personnel groupings. You can be in 10 or 11 personnel, and if a team turns into 12 or 21, you have to be able to play every single down if you're going to play linebacker in this era. The days are just the guy who can tackle from A to B gap or over. You got to play from A to D, and you have to be able to drop into the flats, cover slot guys as well. It's a different skill set now than what it's ever been with the RPO offenses. That the linebackers who have a multi-dimensional skill set, very, very high value guys.
Totally agree with that. I mean, man-to-man kills the RPO, right? If you can play it well. Carl, I do have a question for you though. So with all these like two deep shell coverages that we're seeing come back in vogue in the NFL, and just trying to deny the explosive play, we're seeing these nose guards get bigger, and they kind of become back in vogue. Jordan Davis getting picked by Philly last year would be a good example of that. Do you think there's room with how much two deep coverage we're seeing to go back to a bigger linebacker at one of the spots just because they're protected over top?
You can either go big at linebacker or you can go big at nose guard, but I don't think you can be both. If you're going to play too high shell, you put the big nose guard in because you want that guy to two gap and be able to play in both A gaps to stop the run. And so when you're taking that safety out of the run game, out of the box, and you're putting him back to stop the explosive play, you're taking a guy away from the box. So you need the bigger defensive lineman inside like Jordan Davis in order to do that. But if you bring in more of a bigger Mike who's not as good in coverage and you have the big nose, you're going to really leave yourself susceptible in some of the passing game stuff. So I think that you got to either go one or the other. You can have a big run stuff in Mike, but then you're going to need a more athletic guy up front, or you can go with the big two gap guy and have the more athletic Mike. But you have to do your personnel like that with the way the teams are playing offensively.
Speaking of the big guys, we got a question here in the chat. Could Jalen Carter go number one? Bud?
Totally.
Totally.
I think it's going to be I think it'll be one of the two quarterbacks, assuming Chicago trades out of there, because I don't think Chicago is actually going to take a quarterback, even though I would consider taking a quarterback every single year until you finally get the position right. I mean, Chicago has not had good quarterback play in my lifetime, and I'm almost 40. So I think Jalen Carter absolutely could go. I got to see him pretty local to me here in Orlando play at Apopka. He was also their quarterback when they got in the red zone, and he punted for Apopka as well as they went to the state title game there against Columbus. This dude is a freak, and I mean, I thought he was Georgia's best defensive lineman last year.
Well, number one, he played at Apopka, one of the legendary high school programs in the country that definitely believes in running the rock with the single wing that they ran. When you talk about Jalen Carter, could he go number one? He could, but here's the problem. Everybody looks at offense and quarterbacks now. You always want to take a generational player on defense if you can get them. Guys who played like Warren Sapp and Ndamukong Suh, Darrell Russell, Tommy Harris. These are guys that played up front that changed and helped franchises be perennial playoff and Super Bowl contenders because the game is won in the trenches, man. It's won on the interior and on the inside. And if you have an opportunity to get a generational defensive player on your front seven, I always think that you can take it and you can figure out the quarterback situation through free agency or later in the draft.
The quarterback stuff through free agency is tricky, though, because you might end up paying Hall of Fame money for a Hall of Very Good guy like a Kirk Cousins. And that kind of kills your roster if you're having to pay him $45 million a year. And then you have to cut some of these other guys who are really good go. I think it is easier to find some dudes at other spots. But defensive end, like we talked about with Will Anderson, not so much. It's hard to get those really good edge rushers there in free agency. Typically, we see D lineman go number one if it's a bad quarterback year. Like last year was a horrific quarterback year. This year it seems to be a much better quarterback year. So my guess here, Chicago trades out and QB goes number one. But he might be the first defensive player picked.
I'm going to bet when we look back on this 10 years from now that Will Anderson and Jalen Carter would have played in more Pro Bowls than the quarterbacks in this draft.
Man, I've been being
Then all of
told.
them?
Then all of them?
All of
Okay.
them.
See, this is such a great discussion. I've been told multiple times in my ear, we gotta move on, we gotta move on. But I'm like, no, I don't want to interrupt this great conversation here, guys. Real quick, though, just super quick here. Bud, who goes number 1 overall?
I think it'll be Bryce.
Okay, Carl?
I think it'll be Bryce Young as well.
All right, there you have it.